fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Daniel Quinn and Chris Brunty. On today's episode, oh boy, we are joined today by author and writer Victoria Sandbrook. And before we get into that interview, I just want to remind everyone that we do have a Discord and a Patreon. So if you want to come and support us and independent artists like us, you can do so. Just go on the Patreon. You get cool stuff like quarterly Worldbuild with us sessions that we make into the podcast. You get front of line VIP access to all of your world building prompts. So just come on, join a Patreon if you want, or not. That's fine too. Anyway, enough of the shilling. On with the interview. And welcome. We are joined today by, very excitedly, mind you, by author and writer Victoria Sandbrook. Very, very happy to have you here.
I'm very glad to be here.
Victoria, for those who might not know, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a speculative fiction author. I've written and published a handful of shorter works, most of which skew towards the fantastic. And I am perennially working on fantasy novels. I have not yet published one, but I am ever working towards it. I have also got a background in publishing. I was a nonfiction book editor for several years. I am a freelance book critic for Publishers Weekly. And I have 2 kids who keep me pretending pretty much day in and day out on one level or another. So, yeah, that's me.
I think that's so important, right? To kind of stay grounded in the fantasy of it all.
Yeah.
So Daniel, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, so to give a sense of like what stuff Victoria has written, she's like in a few of the big name, I feel like magazine outlets out there, from Giganotosaurus to Shimmer, and she's got like a novella out. But what I thought was really cool about her work is she switches styles between each of these. And they're very different from each other. And there's in El Cantar, there's a very kind of like lyrical style. And then in her Sun Moon story, she's got more of a, I'd say, like terse kind of Western feel. And then in the novella, you've cultivated this, you call it Gothic mad scientist, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, what inspires you to write all these different styles, and like, how do you prep yourself for that?
Yeah. I think to some degree, I'm not sure. I feel like I'm still at the early side of my writing career when it comes to really my experience with thinking craft through and putting it on the page and doing sort of the best job that I can. And I do try to make the style that I choose fit the character and the setting, like to make everything do more than one thing all at once. So as much as my choices are different than any other given author might be, I do feel like the style, the tone, the words that I'm picking, the mechanics that I'm using on a sentence level, it's all driven by sort of the effect that I'm trying to create for the reader. And Sun Moon started out as one of my first unsuccessful attempts at Flash, and I will say unsuccessful because I have yet to really. I think I have one published Flash piece, but I am very bad at Flash. And I am continually bad at Flash. People read it and often say, this would be a great novel. So I'm always trying to force myself to go shorter. And Sun Moon started out as Flash. It's still very, very short. And I needed it to be as terse and quick as possible. And I think that also works for the setting. And it works for the character, and everything sort of blended together and made a much different voice, a much different set of mechanics than I would have used for, my yet unpublished novel about amateur botanists set in 1860s New Hampshire. That's a very different, that's going to be closer to, to what's in my novella, just from a period standpoint. When you're talking about just the dystopian West, I think there's an expectation for how things read. and I do keep that in mind. But I do also think it's sort of a layered effect. It's part of what's building everything else for the reader as an experience. Um, so I think that I do try to use my muscles to really develop a much bigger a much bigger toolbox of word choice, syntax, all those things, so that it is a different experience every time I start out writing and every time someone starts out reading my work.
I want our listeners to actually hear a couple of sentences of this like rich lyrical style because we don't
Okay.
get to see it often.
Okay.
So I'm going to send you a little couple of sentences I snipped out. I just wanted to hear when you talk about adjectives and word choice.
Okay. The willow box went on top and slightly to her left. From it she drew a sheet of paper, milled by lovers quarreling at midnight, a dark tincture ink of mustard seed and sheep's birthing blood, her bone quill carved from the crooked finger of the still living but long forgotten god that had forged her in her first mother's womb.
I mean, talk about magical ingredients. Like that's the bread and butter right there, I think.
And not only that, but that type of language is just so like precise and evocative as well. Like that is really fabulous stuff there.
Thanks.
um I do have a question, right? Because you're talking about switching from flash fiction to novella to short fiction, and there's that famous kind of saying where the short story is all about capturing a scene,
Mm-hmm.
and the novel is all about following that scene and expanding upon it. How do
Yeah.
you view flash fiction in that regard, right? Like, do you see it as like a distillation of a feeling compared to a scene? Is it, I mean, what are your thoughts on that in terms of craft?
Um, so what I attempt, and take this with that reminder that most people read the flash that I write and say, I want the rest of the series. And not the rest of the Flash series, the rest of the 7-book fantasy novel. Like, why is this? This is not a scene. This is not Flash. Um, what what I try to do in Flash is capture that flash in the pan moment of a feeling. And I think I mean one I think that one of my problems as a writer when it comes to writing Flash is that I am seeing the whole iceberg, and I am hinting at the whole iceberg the whole time. And while that's great for the experience, I think I'm also laying the groundwork for, like I said, the rest of the novel. And that's not what Flash really does. I do have a hard time being so economical that all the story you want is contained in those 750 words.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
and it's I think the Flash that I see that succeeds really well um, gets the audience to be very wrapped up in a very deep world with very few words, and then it finishes, and whether or not you want to read more about the world, you at least feel like this experience is over. You don't feel like you're left waiting at a movie theater for part two. You're not in an intermission, that sort of thing. And I don't think that I've necessarily done that well within that very hard limit of flash fiction, that below 1,000 words. um, I think I got as close as I could with Sun Moon the Truth. It is, I think it's 1,500 words if I remember correctly,
Mhm.
and it needed it needed one more beat after it was Flash. It needed one good strong beat that it couldn't that made it not Flash. And I think that story needs that one flashback that sort of changes the tone, that gives it its forward momentum, that gives you reasons why to care. And I didn't do it under 1,000 words, and I think that's fine. I don't think I necessarily have to succeed at Flash. I will keep trying. I think it's a really great exercise for someone who naturally writes long,
Mhm.
who
Mm.
naturally comes up with ridiculously huge novel ideas that are very unwieldy. Um, so it has definitely given me some really great projects. And one of the stories that I'm very proud of, Sun, Moon, and the Truth. I think it would not have come out if I hadn't tried to do Flash. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Take my advice about Flash and my thoughts about Flash with a grain of salt, because I don't know that I do it well. But it's hard. It's very hard.
Yeah, I mean, especially with a genre that is notoriously long-winded. I mean, we've talked about the idea of fantasy and why it necessitates 1,100 page books, and often
Yeah,
as much as it does. And to tell a fantastical story or a speculative fiction story within so such a tight constraint is actually very impressive, and
I
kind of
agree.
shows, like, yeah, I mean, it kind of shows that the type of craft and expertise that you need, not just with the form but also with the genre that you're dealing with as well.
Yeah, yeah. You have to know, you have to know what currencies to borrow on with your reader. And I've read plenty of Flash where it doesn't connect with me because it might connect with the 10 writers sitting next to me at the con, but not me, because I'm not versed in that subgenre. I missed the connection to the convention that tells you, like the literary convention that pulls you in. And um it's a risk. It's a huge risk to not be able to lay out your reasoning for including this in other ways, to not hint, and or to always hint and not necessarily to always make obvious. um and I want to keep working at it because I think it's a brilliant form. And I also want to like applaud any writer who does really well in Flash all the time, because like I don't understand how their brains
It's
work,
like
because
poetry writing. It's tough.
yeah,
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 yeah.
absolutely. I think that's a good actually a good analogy, because
Hmm.
it's there's so much about it that is form, and there's so much about it about escaping form. And if you don't know what you are escaping from,
Hmm.
you can read it and enjoy it, but you may miss some of the undertone. And if you're not well versed in it, the people that are experts read your attempts and think this is great, but you could push a little bit more, and that push sometimes is really hard to master,
Mm,
as a newcomer to the form, without years of practice and experience and critique after critique after critique. So
yeah.
In your stories, you're doing it in a different time, in a different career, assuming that you don't have a background in botany, which would be embarrassing if you did. Uh,
don't.
but what do you do to do your research? How do you set out doing that? Is there like one source that you go to, or do you start out and be like, all right, foundations of botany kind of thing to make it feel
Mm.
more lived in and real?
Um, it really varies. So, when it came to botany, I was editing a field guide to alpine flora and fauna, at the time, and so I was surrounded by the most brilliant minutia of flowers and plants above tree line in the White Mountains. And I was immediately addicted and needed to tell a story about somebody who, was setting the stage for, you know, amazing science, but which was, someone who was an amateur. Um, so, I had my very first research book in my hand when the idea came to me. So I think that helped a lot. Um, I mean, the research there spanned so much. There's a lot of experience that I did that played into it. I've been a hiker. I love the whites. The whites were my introduction to hiking. I have spent a lot of time above tree line up there. A lot of my friends are either conservationists or naturalists in their own right. And I knew a lot when I went in there. I also had access to an amazing historical collection at the Appalachian Mountain Club. where I worked at the time, and I got to hold everything from um, collections that people had put together with all their botanical samples from that time to essays that had been published through the club back then. So, really, I do love primary research when you're talking about, an actual historical moment. And that novel is very much this world adjacent. Fantastic, but it's, very much placed in 1860s New Hampshire. Um, when it came to writing my novella, and setting it in 1890s Philadelphia, um, I did honestly, I did way less research, in part because I wasn't looking at street names and wasn't talking about a setting outside of this Gothic manor home very much. I reached out to some friends who know a lot about Philadelphia and the time, so I totally borrowed, and I don't mind doing that either. Um, and I did some reading on ballet history. I grew up in dance. I knew a lot of ballet history, but I needed to refresh myself, with some of those things. Um, it's really a combination of the internet and people and interlibrary loan, and checking out every book I can find and browsing bibliographies and indexes like a madwoman. And I can really get lost in the research. I can really, really get lost in the research. Um, I mean, for a single scene in a novel in progress I checked out probably 10 books on trade in the Ottoman Empire, you know, towards, you know, towards the end of the 1800s, and looked up, exactly why tulips were so important in Ottoman palaces. And like that's that's going to be a nice sentence. I didn't need the book, but I got the book. I read most of the book, you know.
Are we going to get into tulip mania over in the Netherlands so we can talk about the economic boom and bust that came with it
It was
of the
my first
speculative market?
yeah, that was my first introduction to it, and suddenly I was
Yeah.
like deep. I was so deep. So there's so much that I know I don't know about history, and so much I love learning along the way. When we're talking, like, it's an interdisciplinary research process. It's economics, it's social research, it's costumes, and
Hmm.
how people dressed, and in how all that plays into trade and financing and social structure and politics. And it's like, I love it. I love that it's all connected, because that's what makes it real to me as a writer. That's what makes me feel like, I can build something new based on my knowledge of how it had happened, how we really did things as humans somewhere in the world. And it gives me all sorts of great ideas for, um, building something that I feel like is really well thought out. Um, and it often, I feel like the best parts of research um, have not broken my plot, have not broken the characters that I set out to write. They have only improved upon things. Like, I don't think I can ever remember getting to a spot where I had written something and I was going back through in revisions, and I was shoring up my research, and I found something that didn't work and I had to go back and rewrite. And in a, like, I broke this whole scene can't happen. It was more like, all right, I need to move where her belt was, that color I need to switch. Or it was, this actually gives me an even better idea than what I had, and this makes it even more real and even more fun to write. So research is really, I feel like one of the best parts of the process so far, um, for me, because it just gives me more ideas and more fuel to do what I do.
I love how in depth you went with that, and I love how much the research really informs the rest of the work. Like it even if it, I mean, if you want to talk about icebergs, right? You want
Right.
to talk about the idea that all of this is just a foundation for what you actually write about, and the interconnectivity that you talk about there is
Yeah.
exactly what I think is so important when it comes to not just world building, but fiction and writing in general.
Mm-hmm.
And man, that's so much fun, especially like as someone who plays tabletop role playing games quite often and has almost certainly been put on a list due to what I have researched, like
Yeah.
because that's just how it happens. It's like, hey, how much of this chemical would I need in order to wipe out an entire village? Let me just
Oh
type that
yeah.
up real quick. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's just like, just in case that my players get that together. It's I'm sure that everyone who's ever DM'd has had that "don't look at my search history, please" moment. Where you're just looking up the stuff because you need to know, because you just have to anticipate it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say I definitely had a moment. I logged a couple of those moments in my Facebook feed, like I was talking about writing, and where I was in the process, and I have memories pop up on a yearly basis. It's like I blew up a railroad today, and it's like, oh God, why did I do that? And at the same time, oh, that was the day I blew up that railroad. Oh, that was so good. And
Research.
I
It's
mean,
all for research.
yeah, heaven forbid anyone ever takes that seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of research, you open your novella with a thank you to sensitivity readers.
Yes.
So I wanted to get for a lot of our listeners, like they're not all craft people and writing people necessarily. So I wanted to get a little bit of an explanation of what that is and how it's used in publishing, and then how it's helped you, and also maybe if you could talk a little bit about how the different cultures that you've written play into that.
hmm So, yes, I use sensitivity readers for my novella, in part because, well, no, solely because, not just in part, solely because I have a main character there. One of my two narrators is a young female doctor from Damascus, and I am not from Syria. I am not a Muslim woman. That is not my faith or my identity, and yet I have her as a character, and I wanted to make sure that I was representing her not just fairly, um, in the work, but very well. And I could probably do an entire podcast on why I chose her. Um, but that aside, at the point where I had chosen her and I had made the decision to write um, in a perspective that was very different from my own, and to have that perspective affect the plot, um, and affect the character and the way the characters relate, I knew that I needed to make sure that I had not only done my research, but that I had talked to people who could identify with that character, in at least one way, who could tell me, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, hold on, you've done something really offensive here. And I needed to make sure before I even talked to those three wonderful women who did this work on my behalf. I had to make sure that I had done all of my homework, and I read and read and read and read to make sure that I had done as much as I could. And they definitely still had comments for me, and I had to very much be prepared to hear them say something like, "You have created a character who really doesn't need to be Muslim, who really doesn't need to be from Syria, and this doesn't make any sense." I needed to be able to hear, you have imposed a Judeo-Christian worldview on someone who does not have that. Please go back to the drawing board. I am really glad that I didn't hear those things. I hope that their comments, I believe their comments really helped hone a character I had built and made me understand her more. There were some things that I was having her do, that I didn't understand the significance of, and they helped me put those last few pieces together. It's the way if you know that someone always throws salt over their shoulder, um, you know, in a conversation, and you don't know why, and you just have your character throw salt over their shoulder while they're talking, you miss the whole point that it's supposed to be to ward off the devil. And maybe you need someone to tell you, like, oh, this is an old superstition, and it's supposed to be done only when, this and that happens, um, and I needed someone to sort of double check those moments and to give me some of that context. And it worked really well. I think sensitivity readers are really important for closing those gaps. They are definitely not people who are there to educate us writers in what we need to do. We need to show up having educated ourselves as best as we can in the cultures we're writing, and the different abilities and the different ages of characters we're writing. I went to sensitivity readers because I had written someone very different from myself in terms of culture. But if you are writing someone who has a different brain than you, who is neurodivergent and you are not, or, you are, but in a very different way than your character. If you have someone who is very differently abled than you, from a very different socioeconomic status than you, it's good to have somebody who has those experiences be part of your critique team, part of your final check, and to give them, at least within your own mind, the power to say, go back to the drawing board. You have to fix this. This doesn't make sense. And to give them space to bring that reality to what you're writing. So I'm really glad that I got to work with those three women, and I think the piece is so much better for what they had to add to my writing, to my craft.
I kind of want to follow up there a little bit, because
Yeah.
I have this feeling that, people often see writing as such a solitary experience. And in a lot of ways, I think that's mostly true. But where I think that a lot of people tend to lose sight of that is in the editing process, right? Like, I think what you're talking a lot about here is coming to the editing process with such an open mind, trying to keep as much of, or trying to do as much research as you've done. Obviously, you're a fan of research, which I very much appreciate.
Yeah.
And if I can kind of follow that up, I mean, you've clearly been in like the writing industry for a while, and I want to ask you, when it comes to getting your work published, do you count how many rejection letters you get, like some people do? And if so, or just, I want to talk a little bit more about like getting published in general for those who might not know, and where you kind of, I mean, because you're published now, right? You've made it. You're already raking in the thousands of dollars, right?
Oh, tens of hundreds of cents of dollars. Yes. um, yeah. I just, to sort of start talking about publication, I think it goes back to the community of writing. I would not have anything published had I not found a critique group, a community of people to shake me awake about my own hangups, much less to really help me polish stuff. I don't think I really started maturing as a writer until I had a regular critique group, and I was reading their work and they were reading mine on a regular basis. And that really started changing things for me. And what I realized, um, as someone who had been on the opposite side of the table a lot, having been an editor, what I realized that as a writer, what I wanted to bring, was sort of this balance of hubris and humility. I had to have enough confidence in my work that I would submit it to my critique group, that I would finish what I was started, when I'd finish what I would started, and I would send it out to editors until something stuck, and like that, like you need that kind of confidence as a writer. You have to believe that you have something worthy of publishing, or you're going to get a couple of rejection letters and you're going to be like, well, it's not good enough. Why keep putting myself in this position? But at the same time, I have to have enough humility to listen to my peers, to listen to the editors, to listen to the audience when you start getting reviews, and to take that into account and to say, okay, I'm not perfect. Okay, not everything I write is going to win an award. Not everything I write is going to get published. Not everything I write is going to get through my critique group with that this is good. Like you have to be able to balance those two things. And I think I would not have gotten anywhere if I hadn't found many moments of balance with those. And I'm certainly not perfect with this. There are some things that I have gotten the most in-depth personal rejections on. This is perfect if you would just, and I won't. I'm sorry, I won't. It's not, no. I'm not going to change it for you because I love it the way it is. And it may never get published because I don't want to change it, and that's fine. So you have to be able to do that too and accept that sometimes. But all that community is also so important when you start sending stuff out and getting into the rejection mill and just constantly sending things. I am a rejectomancy practitioner. It is not healthy. Um, I feel like it gets me through, but I think it probably holds me back just as much as I think it gets me through. I track stats. I look at the percentages at the places I send stuff. I I know that this rejection over that rejection, this is quite good, this was very good, means I read to the end or I read past the first page. There's all that online if you want to find it. And it can break you, and it can also give you so much hope in like two little words. Yeah, I track everything. I track everything. My husband thinks I'm crazy because I have so many spreadsheets for this stuff. But it gives me a little bit of sense of control when I know I really have none. And I mean, it's sort of like a harmless, it's sort of a harmless thing in many ways. Being a little obsessed about exactly where in the process any one piece might be. But it's all, and so I have fun with it.
That actually sounds like a lot of fun. I'm not going to lie. Like having the Excel spreadsheet open on multiple screens is always fun.
Yeah. And like I use Submission Grinder, and you look at the percentage, like, okay, well, 98% of people just get rejected, but then there's like 1.5% of people get a personal, and like so many people get past this point or that point, and I got into that 1.5%. It's like, it doesn't necessarily mean much about my writing, but it gives me some, hope sometimes when it's hard to find hope elsewhere because rejection letters don't come with, much more than form letter encouragement most of the time. So, you take what you can find, what hope you can find as a writer and what hope makes you tick. And that's what kind of makes me stay afloat.
Flipping back to writing about experiences that you know or experiences that you've had, how would you say having children has changed either the way that you write beyond time constraints and everything?
Mm. Um, I think I was not able to understand the true depths of existential dread until I had children. Because not only do I have that for myself, I worry about their future. I think that, and maybe this is in no small part COVID, and politics and everything that's going on and climate change and all that, like all the things I have to be scared about for my girls. Um, I I sort of look back and I think, it would be easier to only worry about me. So I think the depth of emotion and understanding, that came with being a mom, that really came with understanding that like I have lives in my hands now, and I have chosen to bring them up in this world, and I think that all really has changed sort of what I choose to write about. I have some very personal um, stories that have not yet been published that I don't think I would have tackled had it not been, you know, had I not had the realization that, that my experiences needed to be put on paper for my kids too. Um, and ways, stories that I've written to process some of the things that I've gone through as a mom, and as a person, and handling my own, um, psychological and emotional state as an individual in some crazy times. I think those are really important things, and those may never be published, but I think they're very important exercises for me as a person, for me as a writer, and like I said, I think they're things that I have on paper for my kids to read, so they understand someday when they are mature enough and ready to read that stuff, if they have the desire to read that stuff, it's there for them. Um, and and I think I appreciate more, um, the breadth of age ranges that my characters can be in as well. Um, enjoying writing a character who doesn't have kids to worry about, thinking about characters who do, thinking about characters who have adult kids and they don't have to worry anymore. I don't think, I think I had kids in a time when I was sort of maturing a great deal as a writer and really starting to write characters who weren't always inside my own experience set. And I think, um, I don't know, I think they gave me some courage to really stretch, at times, because um, I realized that there were like they just made me realize that there's so much more of the world beyond what I can see and touch. And I'm sending them out in the world to experience those things in some ways, for themselves. So I don't know if that was. Sorry if I'm not being at all concise here.
That's the
I'm.
whole world and the kids, though. It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the entire breadth of experiences there is like, I mean, I am childless at the moment, so I'm like also like, oh God, it's gonna be, oh my, like just recognizing all of that and what's happening is, oh, that's deep. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
uh,
it's special. It is, and I have written so far, I think only one story. No, okay, two stories. I've written two stories about my motherhood experience, um, that have nothing to do on paper with my motherhood experience, if that makes any sense. Like no one would read them and be like, "Oh my God, she was processing what she's going through."
Mhm.
hmm.
And they were so much fun, and I return to them, and they're very different. One is hilarious, and one is hilarious but will also make you cry, and the other one is just like dark and scary and like body horror. Um and I love going back to them so much. And understand, like knowing where I've, like how far I've come since living those experiences. um and it's I think the closest thing I've come to journaling, which is weird. Like I've never been a journaling kind of person. um but that, like those things are like definitely my journals, and at some point someone will read them, and like I've read them at conventions. They'll end up published somewhere someday, I hope. um but I've never been more proud of stories that I think may not see the light of publication. um so that was a new experience for me as well. Not, writing things that I'm like, what, if no one ever, this never makes me any money, if it's never commercialized, if it's never like given an audience, that's fine. I'm really glad I wrote it. um I'm not usually like, I as much as like I love my art, and it's, for me, it's also very much something I want to do professionally, so it's it's a new thing um to not have those aspirations for a few of my pieces.
Hmm.
Speaking of those lost journals,
Hmm.
one question I have to ask you, only because this is a world building podcast and I've got to eke
Oh
out
yeah.
as much advice as we can out of
Yeah.
our precious guests. You spoke of the legendarium and what that means to you, early in your blog, really. And I was wondering, what are your advice to newbie world builders who are hoping to create either, something that's role playing, something that's writing, something that's a play, whatever format it's in. How can the Legendarium help them, and how has it helped you?
Also, what is the Legendarium for those who don't know?
Yeah, so I was writing for a while. I was writing um myths and tales and backstory that I was writing myths and tales that informed what I was writing and informed the stories and informed the history of the magic. And I was not using those things as text at all. It was sort of like writing my own writing my own primary sources. Um, and it gave me a lot of exciting material because I started thinking about why, why this culture or why this magic, and how did this come to be, and what do people think about it versus what's actually real. I have some I have some I've started those again and again when I'm working on, a second world fantasy especially. But also just having a place to collect, facts and figures and, glossaries and language, and, where do I put this PDF of, 250 words of, that I, random generated that, will become my fantasy language. you know um Having some place to collect those things. um for me, it's sort of holding my feet to the fire and making sure that I am sort of sourcing the material accurately, within my own head, and not just sort of strewing papers about the room, and facts about my head, and, just trying to remember everything. And it also gives me the freedom to have a lot of detail in that iceberg, to have a lot of information collected, in sometimes very rote ways and sometimes very creative ways, like writing my own, origin stories and mythos, and, you know, and having gods and characters that never ever appear, in the text, but making sure that I know, like how far this goes. um and, it gives me, it's good inspiration when you're really running dry. There's almost always something to write about when you reach into that pile of research, however organized or disorganized it is, whether it's physical, whether you've got a notebook filled with it, or you've got, a folder on your computer, or, you know an archive on Scrivener of something's there. There's I think there's a different way to do it for every book, for every person. So I really like using them because it's the way I keep my head on straight when I'm dealing with sort of all this stuff that I'm trying to stuff in every sentence, every paragraph. Um, I don't know, keeps me honest.
I'm sure that every writer for sure has a favorite character that no one has ever met or even read about. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
everyone has that for sure.
Yeah. I have I definitely have a few. And I have a few that will, have probably made the page, but have really just like graced their peripheral vision, you know. And I often wonder about, when I read really great fantasy, I often wonder about, the people who are on the sidelines in the backgrounds, like when it's really just artfully done and I'm thinking about what I'm reading from a craft perspective. I really appreciate sort of poking at the shadows on the sidelines, like trying to peer into the wings, with writers to see, like, who else is there, who's working the ropes. that kind of thing. It's an exciting thing being able to sort of peel back the veil just a little bit, and enjoy those side characters more than they're probably intended to be enjoyed sometimes.
And speaking of peeling back the veil, we're about to do that now because it's just about time for us to get into the world building jam.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nervous and excited.
You should be. I'm always excited and also slightly nervous, but it's fine.
Okay.
All right. So for those of you who don't know how this works, we're going to be rolling some dice to figure out what kind of scenario we're going to be making up. Now, because it's October, we're actually not going to be rolling the genre today because this month is made for spookiness, and we're going to be doing the horror genre without the dice roll. However, we still have our subject, which is going to be between an item, a monster, a place, a historical figure, an event, or a cataclysm. And then we're going to be rolling into a theme, and we've changed up the themes a little bit. We've got tragedy, sacrifice, love, metamorphosis, pride and honor, madness and the unspeakable, triumph and hope, and treachery and revenge. So we're going to roll some dice, and we will see what we get. So first up is the subject. So we've got an event. And then the theme surrounding that horror event is going to be love. So, Victoria, you're our guest. We have the genre of horror, an event that is surrounded by love. So, take it away.
Oh boy. Okay.
Bonus points if there are pumpkins involved. Just so you know.
Bonus points for pumpkins. Okay. So, I'm really feeling like, and maybe this is because I'm also in Massachusetts and October and pumpkins and horror. I'm really feeling like Forbidden Love, Salem witch trials. Someone is on the gallows, with a loved one in the audience, waiting for
the hangman.
Yes.
Executioner.
Yeah,
Okay.
the execution. Yeah, the sentence. The charges are being read one final time. The executioner is there, and that's when the wind starts blowing cold.
Okay.
It's very hocus pocus.
Yeah.
Witchfinder
I need to watch that movie like every year.
Me too.
Yeah, the wind blows cold. Am I doing this right?
Yeah.
There's no wrong way.
There's no wrong way. This is the brilliant thing about the World Build Jam. So before we we continue on, can we talk about that forbidden love a little bit more? Let's dig into that, because that's the thing that kind of piqued my interest ever so much.
Yeah, and why is the lover like on the chopping block? Like, what did they do?
Yeah.
I think the lover is protecting the suspected witch, and instead became the suspected.
Is the suspected witch in the crowd watching them? Is it the other lover? Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to throw in a little thing. The person on the gallows is in fact a witch finder themselves. And the forbidden love is that they have fallen in love with an actual witch.
So they're like an inquisitor.
Like a for real witch, or like someone accused of being a witch?
Oh, good question.
Let's see. Let me pull out my book, The Hammer of Witches, and see what it says. Everyone's a witch, turns out. Okay.
No, you got to find the witch's mark.
Yeah, maybe the inquisitor or the witch hunter isn't sure whether they're actually a witch or not.
Maybe. Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Maybe they're convinced, but they don't care that they've been shown that it doesn't matter, and love transcends that boundary,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether or not they've signed the book of Satan, right?
Yes.
Right. And
Which has got to bring up all sorts of conflicting emotions, right?
Well,
Like,
and
my
what's the cold
God.
wind? Is the cold wind contradicting that belief they currently have?
I think in the perspective of the person, the witch finder on the gallows,
Mhm.
I think that doubt is there,
Yeah.
and it's heart-wrenching. And I say the witch in the crowd, the beloved in the crowd, does not know whose power is being. The witch in the crowd
Evoked?
doesn't. Sorry.
Doesn't know whose power is being evoked here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
doesn't know. Yeah, doesn't know whose power is being invoked. Doesn't know who is basically bringing in change.
Victoria, that sounds like a perfect time to throw in the twist and fuck up our story. I don't know about you, but I'm going to roll this die and we're going to see what the twist is.
Okay.
And we have to incorporate it somehow. So
Okay.
let's see how this goes.
Can I just say one thing though?
Yeah.
Does anyone else have the song from Hunchback of Notre Dame by Frollo stuck in their head right now?
Oh, Hellfire? Hellfire is
Yeah.
a great song. Oh my God.
Now I do.
But to be fair, that's all about burning and desire, not about a cold wind. But that's fine too.
You got to warm up yourself with the fire.
And yeah, the sin of lust. Absolutely. All right, let's see what this die says. Oh, okay. Attach the whole thing to a major movie franchise.
What?
Okay, so this twist is certainly a little bit more difficult. So we now have to take this whole thing and staple it onto a major movie franchise, no matter what it might be. So we're in the ballpark of Disney, but I'd like to stay away from that if possible and kind of push it to something else if we can.
Should it still be horror?
Yeah, the genre doesn't change. It's a matter of we can now attach this story to a movie franchise somehow.
No, but I mean a horror movie franchise.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, that's fine. It doesn't have to be, but it can be.
The worst one would be Freddy.
Oh my God. Well, then it becomes a comedy.
I was moving towards Cloverfield.
Oh,
Yes,
Cloverfield.
go ahead. Please go right ahead.
And I think that, so I'm still thinking like, reasonably coastal Massachusetts, and the cold wind starts to blow, but something's coming out of the water.
Okay.
And the witch hunter is pretty sure that the beloved has summoned this hell beast from the depths.
Okay. All right. All right.
I
All right. I mean, we're still in Massachusetts, so we could instead do something like, oh, I don't know, Dagon, or the old, the deep ones. I mean, there's so many things that we could do as well.
Well, you're referring to the beast from Cloverfield, right? Like that.
Yeah.
That big kind of Godzilla-esque thing, right?
Right.
Yes. So does that mean the witch? Because we don't know. Like, I guess the beloved doesn't really know if the witch is a witch, but he thinks that she is. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that the witch is some sort of emissary of this creature to some extent?
Okay, maybe that's what it is. Maybe the witch finder, after talking to the witch, recognizes that it's not Satan she's worshiping, which is why he's more okay with the type of relationship. She sees the witch as more of an animist or perhaps a shaman of some kind. And so this cold wind is the summoning, not necessarily of the great giant kaiju, but maybe of one of the lesser cousins of some kind. And maybe we can kind of throw it in that way as well. Ooh.
Is she even human? Or he?
Oh,
Something
we could also
beyond
do. We could also just do the shape of water.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea either. Okay.
So then you can't really hate the beloved when they discover the truth. Still loves this thing / person. but
Okay.
it's not a
Okay.
fault of its own for what it is.
I think I think I have this idea. This is Roanoke, right? This
Oh,
is
Oh
yeah.
boy.
So
oh
so
yes.
now
Croatoan.
so now we can just explain away an entire disappearance of a town,
Oh
and we
yeah.
can just say that
Hmm.
that's what happened to them.
And
Absolutely.
it's perfect that you chose Cloverfield, Victoria, because each movie is like so radically different, and it's always
Right.
like a mystery box. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Except the
So
third one's trash, and don't watch the third one.
that's true.
so so the witch calls in. The witch calls in this being
Hmm.
to wipe out the town so that the witch hunter can be saved. And so not only do we have the witch revealing themselves in order to save the beloved, who might now reject them because
Yeah,
it is proven, it
it's a
like
risk.
beyond a doubt,
Yeah.
it is proven these arcane abilities, this non-humanness is all there.
Hmm.
Um, but also we have fully revealed the truth of the depth of the love the witch has for the creature.
Yeah.
Yeah, to expose like itself completely. You know.
Right, right.
I think one of the interesting images that I'm now getting is the Witchfinder alone in an entirely empty colony because he's rejected his
Yeah.
love and she's gone back to the sea.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
All right.
It's tragic.
That's pretty cool. I don't think we're going to do better than that right now. So Victoria, thank you so much. That was excellent. And that means we get to move on to the lightning round or the
Ooh,
rapid fire question part. So Victoria, my wife wants to know, is cereal a soup?
You
no.
monster.
No. All right.
Ah.
And what have you been playing recently?
Patty cake?
Okay. And,
With the kids.
all right. And Daniel, hit him with the rapid fire questions. Go.
So what would, if you could choose any absurd magical component for a spell, what magical component would you choose?
Thai iced tea.
Thai iced
Oh,
tea,
that's
nice.
nice.
I'm
That was
looking
you
at
that had that one ready, Lord.
I'm looking at my Thai iced tea across the room and wishing it had legs.
I
Wow.
mean, it's already like an alchemical process, right? With that
Right?
Thai iced tea. Yeah.
Yeah.
And number two, what is your favorite historical fantasy?
Oh my god. Um mm, I wasn't ready for this.
Ha, gotcha.
Oh, I'm suddenly like forgetting all books I have ever read.
I mean, it could be a cartoon. It's up to you.
Um, I'm just there are so many, but I'm going to just admit, in public for the record that I am a sucker for pretty much anything Sherlock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
Enola Holmes was like everything I needed the other day. And
Oh, I actually wanted to see that. I'm
whether
glad that
it's
it was pretty good.
whether it's text-based or film, like I don't care how B it is, if it's Sherlock, I'm there.
Nice.
All right. And I need you to plug someone who is not yourself.
Mm. Okay. So this ties into it ties into all the time I've been spending reading with my kids lately. But also an entire genre that I'm still very much needing to be more educated about as a reader. I need to really delve. Um, I have been devouring the Mighty Jack and Zeta the Space Girl graphic novels by Ben Hackey. They are middle grade YA, somewhere in there probably, but I love them. I just really like, as a parent, as a reader, I really enjoy them. And they're just a great little bit of escapism in my life that I've been getting to enjoy, and also like enjoy reading to my kid um who loves all this stuff as much as I do, and it's just wonderful.
All right. And finally, where can people find you and your work?
So you can find my website at victoriasandbrook.com. I'm also on Twitter at vsandbrook. That's my last name is very phonetic, Sand and Brook, Sandbrook. I'm on Facebook. I have a page there. I usually only accept real people I know friend requests, but I'm definitely on Twitter as well for anybody who wants to strike up a conversation. And my most recent publication is on Giganotosaurus. It was the January release, and that's my novella Les Jardins Animés, 1893. As we mentioned, it's mad scientist gothic with dancing automatons. It's
They're
brilliant.
very cool.
I love it. I mean, it's brilliant. Like I loved writing this. I don't necessarily. I
Oh, it's brilliant. I read it. It's
thank
brilliant.
you.
You could
Thank you
say
for saving me.
it.
Thank you for saving me. Um,
Excellent.
so that was my most recent publication. I have a list of other publications up on my website with links. Everything is online. I have some audio that's been published as well there. That's where you can find me right now.
Fabulous. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been real fun.
I loved this. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Anytime. And that was our interview. Gentlemen, I had a lot of fun creating a combination of The Shape of Water and The Crucible, basically.
I still need to see that.
You've never seen The Crucible?
No, I've seen The Crucible. Tituba.
Oh, Shape of Water.
Yeah,
Shape
I
of
haven't seen The
Water's
Shape of
quite
Water
good.
either.
It's quite good. It's not my favorite Guillermo movie, but it's still quite excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what was your favorite part of the interview, gentlemen?
What I really enjoy about having some of our guests on, which we think we should do more, is being able to hear them read a little piece of their work, because understanding how rich like her language is in some of these pieces is huge, especially given that, spec fic, we're trying to create a lot of unseen worlds before, through our language, and part of the art of the writing is figuring out how do we get that across, as succinctly and as delicately as possible. And I think she does that in an amazing way.
I would agree that she did it in a really amazing way, but I also would counter that with readings for fucking nerds. To be perfectly frank here, her prose was really stunning, and to hear it from her was really awesome. I would agree with that.
It was enjoyable to talk about the process. I'm not sure if we've touched on it before, but a lot of RPGing or world building, sometimes I get lost in research of trying to find out a topic that I don't actually know a whole lot about. And it's why we are on list. Kind of like when I did the Fallout setting a while back, I did a bunch of research on dumb bunkers, and I'm pretty sure the fact that I looked up where all of my local FEMA bunkers are has to put like a red flag on my account of some sort.
Yeah, talking to Victoria about like the levels of depth of research is always really fun, because I always assume that, it's not just me who does all of the deep research. We all do deep research whenever we're into it, but I do love watching or the extent to which people will go for it.
With Victoria especially, like she has a double burden of like getting a setting right, but also like getting a culture right. And I think the amount of research and her devotion to that research is like so important, in pulling that off.
Oh, agreed. I mean, I've never published anything, obviously. I mean, outside of whatever, for all intents and purposes, I've never published anything. So to be able to kind of express and stretch outside of your comfort zone like that, being able to talk about that, and the community of writers and everything like that comes with, is also really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of World Build with us. A big thank you to Victoria for joining us once again. And remember that if you want to go ahead and send us your own world building prompt, you can do so by sending an email to worldbuildwithus@gmail.com, or you can go ahead and shoot us a tweet over at Let's World Build. Of course, if you want to get to the front of the line with your cool idea and have us talk about it sooner, you can support us on Patreon. Or if you want to skip all that and just talk to us directly, you can go and join our Discord where we'll chat about world building and what your favorite movie is and why you're wrong about it. And that's totally cool. But remember that regardless of all that, we love you very much and we'll see you next week.